Thank you, Ben. As Ben said, this is a review of the new version of Unit4 Financials called 2020. Before I start, let me explain that through this presentation, you will see items that say, for example, version 14, release 6. This presentation is based on the release notes for 2020. But what Unit4 have done is they've put a lot of the features, they've kind of backtracked and put some of the features in version 15 into later releases of version 14. So that's the good news. So let's begin by looking at the technical infrastructure. The first thing they've done is they've included a warning now on the results during browsing if it's been limited by security settings. So what that means in essence is if your administrator has put a limit on what you can see in the capability settings on certain accounts, then if you're doing a browse and you're trying to look at those accounts, you'll get a warning. At least then you can see that the results, if you're trying to reconcile something and there's a warning there, then at least you've got an indication perhaps of why it doesn't reconcile. If we look at the financials application, in version 14, we had a new feature called element authorizations. So what they've done now is they've included a little bit extra functionality in there. So if you create the new element that has to be authorized using assisted element, the authorizer, when he hits or she hits the show work item, it will show the element template master to display the element. So it's going to give the authorizer a lot more information to make a decision on whether to approve that element or not. Now here's one of these features that have been backdated into version 14 at release 4. There is a new feature called Anonymize Change Log. So with the new GDPR legal constraints on protection of personal information, you've got the ability now to remove the that information from the history and audit trail records. Now, as far as Unit4 Financials are concerned, the things that are considered to be personally identifiable are the element name, short name and long name, federal tax ID for our US clients, social security number, again for the US, tax number, all address details, all bank details, and the direct debit mandate details. Now, in my opinion, this feature, the provisional year end, is probably be the biggest plus in 2020. I'm going to very briefly go through this, but what I've done is I've prepared a video which will go into a lot more detail. So bear with me. I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of this feature, and then we'll go into the video where I can demonstrate this in a lot more detail. So you'll notice in the year end, there are two new flags. There is one that says provisional year end, and another that says include documents posted up to and including. So what that means is that at any time you can run a provisional year end. Say, for example, it's the 31st of December. On the 5th of January, you can run a provisional year end, and it would include all documents up to and including the 5th of January, so that if later you do a full year end, all those additional documents since the 5th of January will be included in the full year end that were posted to the previous year.
Phil, can I just
Yeah.
stop you there just for 1 second? I did get a comment. Someone said they couldn't hear the sound. Let me just unmute someone here. Like, can someone like Dawn or someone just let me know if you can hear this as well, or Chaba?
Yes,
or...
I can hear it. Absolutely fine.
Okay, good.
Absolutely clear. Absolutely.
Right. Thanks, everyone. Phil, you've got your screen up. Phil, actually, when you're doing you couldn't just minimize that little box with my face on, could you? That's covering the screen.
You're shy, are
you? Yeah, it just covers up a bit. Okay, sorry, Phil, I'll hand back to you.
So yes, the provisional year end can be run at any time. And the only difference between a provisional and a full year end is that it will still allow postings to the previous year. And you can also undo the year end, both provisional and full year ends. So if during after doing a provisional or a full year end, you want to cancel it and revert back to before having run a year end, that is now possible. Now, it's important to recognize that if you do several year ends in one financial year, it doesn't just include that one year end, it includes several. So let me now take you through a short video that I've prepared that should demonstrate this in a lot more detail. Probably the most important new feature in Financials 2020 is the ability to run the year end in two modes, provisional or full. Normally, a year end performs the following functions.
Phil, we can't hear you. We can only hear you.
Hold the profit and loss accounts and post the net figure to retained earnings in the balance sheet. It will then post the closing balance sheet figures to period 0 of the following year. And finally, it will close the year of the year end being processed, preventing any more postings. Now, that's always been a problem with Unit4 Financials because it meant that you had to wait many months until the auditors had finished all their final year-end preparations before you could finally close it after doing any adjustments. A provisional year-end is a new function in Financials 2020. It will perform all the processing that I've just described of a full year-end, but it will not close the year being ended, allowing you to continue posting to that year. Any subsequent year-end processing will perform incremental postings for any postings applicable to the year being ended, with an input date greater than the date specified for the last provisional year end. So what that means in practice is that you could, for example, if your year end was the 31st of December, before the end of period 1, i.e. the 31st of January, you could do a provisional year end and still keep posting to 2019. But it would then allow you to do reports for the end of period 1 that made sense. In other words, everything would be posted to period 0. So let's have a look at that in practice. What I'm going to do is look at security group 1 for this company. And you can see we're in the current year, 2020, period 9. But it allows me to go back into 2019 and I can carry on posting. I haven't run a year end. So let's have a look at the reports. What do they show us at the moment? Well, if I run a TB for the current year 2020, you can see there's nothing in period 0. So let's run a provisional year end. Now what you can see here is there is a new flag in here that says provisional year end. And if I tick that and start the process, and this isn't going to take long because this company is a very small company, it will now run a provisional year end and do everything apart from closing 2019. So if I go into security group 1 again, you can still see I can still post to 2019, but if I run the reports like I did before, you can see that the opening period 0 is now populated. The report makes sense. Now what I can do is, say for example 6 months have gone by, the auditors have been in, they've made last minute adjustments in 2019, and you're now in a position to run a full year end. So what I can do is run, untick the provisional, and now run a full year end. So if I look back at security group 1, I no longer can go into 2019. It's locked, it's finished. I can no longer process in that year. And if I run the reports again, nothing's really changed there. There's still balances in period 0. Now, say for example, the auditors have been in, done last minute adjustments, you've done your final year end, but you found there was a mistake. What you can do now at version 2020 is undo a year end. So I can say I want to undo 2019, put a log table in, undo, and if I now go back to my security group, I can now post to 2019. If I look at the reports, we're now back to the stage where there is nothing in the opening period. This is a very, very powerful tool in version 2020. Some of my clients have decided to upgrade purely on this functionality. It's a big plus to any organization. It gives them more control over the year end. You don't have to wait months or even years to run your year end. You can run it as soon as you want to, as a provisional. Okay, so that was a small video demonstrating how the provisional, full and undo year ends work. So let's carry on with the 2020 new features. Back in version 14, Unit 4 introduced this browse transactions feature. It's kind of taking over from browse details. It's using new technology and uses the metadata presenters and selectors in the administration module. At version 15, they have introduced some enhancements. Over here on the administration, you can see that they've introduced new features. You can now restart, cancel and view the history of the workflow of a document. You can also copy a document, drill to account summary, edit line comments in the information panel, and also raise corrective journals. Now, for those very familiar with Coda, you will know that you can also do these in browse details. But what Unit 4 are doing is adding all the information in browse details now to the browse transactions. This becomes the browser of choice going forward. On the company master, they've made a couple of enhancements. This is a big plus, certainly in my experience. The problem before with the address category is that you had only one default. And the problem with that is that if you're sending out remittances and also purchase orders, they both use the default, which can be a problem because you don't necessarily want to send an email to the same people. So what you can do now is set up an address category on the procurement tab purely for the purchase order processing. So that means now that when you approve a purchase order, it will go correctly to the person responsible for buying at that place. There's also the ability now to change the actual and turnover balance codes after documents have been posted and in the company, and that is backdated to version 14 as well. In the intercompany module, you can now contain a customer supplier element in the current account. In previous versions, you could actually have a matchable element, but not specifically a customer and supplier element. So this means that, for example, using the intercompany module, you can potentially raise a purchase invoice in one of the companies and it's sent to the other company as a sales invoice. I've noticed there's still a problem with tax. You cannot send tax across or VAT. That still remains to be overcome. In Browse Details, you can now view the primary attachment directly via the primary attachment presenter vocabulary, and this is this item here. So if I click that paperclip, I can see the primary attachment. Previously, you had to go into the Actions button to do this. Regarding pay, you can now change the period and/or date after you've started or after you've generated a payment proposal. There is a new option called Change Payment Period on the Pay Collections menu. Now, this can be really good if your pay proposal can take several days and goes over into a different period. You could, for example, generate the payment on the 30th of September, and for whatever reason it's been delayed and you only start completing the payment proposal in October. You can now change the period. Reconciliation. We've got a few new features on there, so you can now record the date of the reconciliation, and this will default to today's date unless you set a date via the reconciliation master or at runtime. You can also identify the finance user that ran the reconciliation process, and that will be recorded as the reconciliation user, and both of these can be used as vocabularies for use in reports on the selector and presenter masters. You can now copy Flexi fields using Copy Company. When you're copying the elements, you can copy the associated Flexi fields. Now, one of my colleagues has pointed out that this works within the same database, but it will not work if you're trying to copy across databases. It will copy obviously the elements, but it won't copy the associated Flexi fields. You can also copy element template customizations to copy the element template masters. Other modules, There are improvements. You can now have a scheduled task setting up to depreciate the assets. Within Invoice Matching, it's now possible to input a non-matchable invoice or credit note where the invoice total is a different sign to the tax total. And this one is a particular favorite of mine. LRN housekeeping can now be run without posting a journal to finance. Up till this version, if you ran LRN housekeeping, it was posting a document to finance, and you don't necessarily want that to do. So now there's a flag to stop that happening. In the past, what used to happen was it would post a journal to finance, and then you would have to cancel that document in finance. But the good news is now that LRN housekeeping, you can keep tidy your LRNs in Invoice Matching without posting journals. In procurement, they've improved the process so that if you raise a requisition and convert it to an order, it can be automatically submitted to workflow without the manual step of browsing and submitting. Carrying on with other modules, billing, it's now possible to copy a document in Browse, like you can copy a document in the other modules. Code Excel is now fully compatible with 64-bit Excel, in addition to the 32-bit variant. Looking at the administration module, there are now 2 new web services available: Generic Browse and Select Chunked, and Generic Browse Fetch, that enables queries of exceptional large data sets within an interface to be spread over multiple requests. There are also changes to eCustomizer. The customizations are now held within the actual database under table com_screencus. As you know, they used to be held as cus files on the web server. And you can now export and import Customizer like you can do a lot of the things in the administration module now. That's a brief overview of the main new features in Financial 2020. Are there any questions?